So, one of the players in the Sunday Open is relatively new to role playing for realsies. Like, they've played Dungeons and Dragons, they've done a little bit in the past of other games, but this is kind of their first time where everyone at the table cares about the story and the characters, and like they're trying to navigate how to do a good job, how to be a better role player. If you stop by the website, you'll see a long explanation of why I think that's the wrong way to think about it. I don't think being a better role player is a reasonable goal. So instead, what we're going to do is we're going to do the raddest and the saddest things that players do at my table, and maybe that will help give some guidance to this new player. The goal here is not to shame anyone or to build anybody up, just to talk about behaviors that are desirable or undesirable, and what I think goes into making like a really sick group project. So we're going to start with the saddest, the things that suck, and then we're going to talk about the raddest so we can end on a high note. These are not in order. The first thing, the saddest, is when players assume. Players have a really bad habit of thinking they know what's going on. So when they open a book or reach into a hole or attack somebody they think is an enemy, they assume that something works a certain way. And then they go halfway down that path. You have to interrupt them and be like, actually, it's not what you thought it was. And then they get real mad. I think it's fine to go halfway down the path, interrupt them, and they're like, oh, I was totally wrong. That's different. I'm talking they assume something is a certain way and then react poorly when they find out it's not. They very often blame the GM for not being clear enough, when in reality they just didn't ask enough questions before diving in. The second thing, they try to play the story that they think I'm telling. This is similar to the first one, but different. So many people are people pleasers. And the dynamic of role playing, where there's one person facilitating and other people participating, tends to create a situation where players want to please or troll the GM. They think they have it all figured out, and they're going to either go along or not go along. And this drives me crazy. Because one, you absolutely don't know what's going on. And two, I want to be just as surprised as you do. I want to have to react to what you're doing. Whatever you and I come up with is definitely better than whatever I just came up with on my own. If I wanted to tell like a very specific beat for beat story where you just cooperate with me, I'd write a book, right? You are the interesting part of the game for the GM. Please never go along to get along. Just play your character in the most interesting way that you can, and do not worry about what's behind the screen. I promise your game will be better if you just play the character instead of trying to make it work. The third thing, they get caught on details and mistakes. So I tell a joke commonly, which is that all GMs are really bad writers, and that's why we love them, right? Inevitably, you're going to have plot holes, you're going to misspeak, you're going to mess up your own puzzle like I did the other day. You're going to have mistakes, and details are not going to quite add up. And there are going to be things that are absolutely not important or relevant, and players are going to get stuck on them. And they're going to complain about it and be like, well, this doesn't make sense. And it's like, I know, I messed up. Can we move on now? And if that's the extent of it, you're totally fine. That's not a problem. It's when players can't move on from something that you obviously just messed up. That drives me crazy. The fourth thing, keeping the wrong secrets. So there are certain things that you can and probably should keep from your GM about your backstory. Things that you don't want them to mess with, things that you know about your character that just are not relevant enough to ever mention to your GM. But some players take this a bridge too far. As the GM, I need to know what motivates your character, why they're adventuring in the first place, what brought them out into the world. I can't effectively tell a story about your character if I know nothing about them. This is kind of the worst case scenario, where a player has a really good motivation and they just keep it to themselves, so I can't do anything with it. This is frustrating for a lot of reasons, but I've seen it happen where I can't give them the motivation to do the thing that they want to do because they didn't tell me, and then they get mad that they never got to do the thing that they care about. You have to share enough with your GM, but there are some things that are okay to keep. So the very last one, and probably the biggest for me, is what I call board gaming. It's when you play the mechanics of the game instead of the character. So if you're looking at the battle board and you are trying to solve the combat puzzle using movements and attacks and actions, like very move the pieces around the board, take a turn, that sort of thing, it is normal. A lot of people do it. I do it. But I am way, way more interested in what your character is doing and why. I care so very little about the mechanical rules of getting the biggest bonus. It's really, for me, I think you should start with the idea, the narrative idea of what you want to do. And then we translate that into game terms to resolve conflicts. Very often, especially in D&D, it will get flipped around and people will look at the mechanics, see what they can do, what is most likely to be successful based on their stats and stuff, and then make the most optimal choice. And then justify that in character. It is completely ass backwards to me, and I hate it so very, very much. So now that we've gone through the Saddest, let's go to the Raddest. What can you do to be my favorite player in the entire world? So, the number one thing, that's right, we're going to start with the best thing you can do, is to assert lore. Now, what this means is you create things in the world that I have not necessarily approved or designed or even asked for. You tell me where you're from. You tell me what kind of village that is. And together we build this world that includes your great ideas. It is very daunting to map out every town and village and road in the universe. It is way more fun if you just make up some stuff and I work it into the world. That's the fun part of GMing for me, is taking your stuff and putting it into the world in a way that fits. If you want to be the Duke of a region, I have absolutely no problem adding that region to my world. Just put it on another continent, far away, undiscovered. It's not a problem. I love when players just assert lore. When they tell me a story about a myth from their hometown, about a creature. It's the best. Which actually leads into number 2, which is imperfect understanding. I think it is the best when players work their lack of knowledge into their character in an immersive way. If you don't know whether or not something's true, you can play this really interesting character that just doesn't believe stuff. Right? Like conspiracy theories. Playing Skyrim this way is actually very fun. When you start asking how NPCs know things, And it gets very creepy very fast because everyone knows a lot about you. So this kind of imperfect understanding of the world makes characters so much more alive. It is one of the best things you can do to just lean into your lack of setting knowledge and to even take things that you do know or that you think you know and make them half believed. I think that is just the best. Third thing, living in the world. What does that mean? So, in between games, really during games, the more that you interact with the world in an immersive way, the more your character becomes a part of the lore itself. So this might be that you are trying to hook up the innkeeper with the blacksmith, right? That is interacting with the world, living in it. If you pay rent somewhere, if you send mail, if you hire people in town to do a job, like, you can do these little flavor bits that over time really work your character into the world. And as the GM, it gives me so much to play off in the future. If you own lands, I can send you mail from your tenants. If you hook up the blacksmith and the innkeeper, right? Like, they could have a son that does some relevant stuff. There could be a whole bunch of things that happen as a result of you just living in the world. Now, don't call me a hypocrite. But the next one is keeping the right secrets. So there are things that you should not mention to your GM, or rather, things that you may not mention to your GM that can lead to really interesting moments for them. All I really need from you is your motivations and any relevant characters that you want to see come up. If you hide from me maybe a curse or a character flaw, or let's say you signed a contract with a demon that prevents you from doing a thing, I don't necessarily need to know that. If it's relevant to your motivations, sure. If it's not, you can have this really interesting aspect of your character that keeps me asking, why are they acting this way? That's a weird thing to do. I wonder why they are like that. And that is what I have with my current characters in the Sunday Open, and it is beautiful. I love it. I have absolutely no idea what's going on with the bird. I think the fairy just doesn't have a backstory, which is totally fine. I think that's the way to go. But it's got me guessing, and it's got me coming up with all kinds of scenarios where I can try to draw out that character. And so we're just getting it piecemeal from moment to moment, learning more about them. And that is the kind of table I like to be at. So the last thing, which is almost as important as asserting the lore, is playing with each other. One of the best things you can do for a table is to learn to roleplay with each other and not just in response to the GM. So what does this look like functionally, right? You and your comrades should have projects going on. The fighter should be teaching you how to use a sword. The wizard should be explaining to you some of the finer points of magic. You should be starting a line of dessert cakes together. These are things that you can do just in passing as there's downtime, when the GM's looking up notes or after a battle, or really just blatantly in the middle of the game or in between games, where you build the relationship between your characters so that instead of moving to get the flanking bonus, right, you swoop behind the enemy and give your comrade the sign that you've been working on. And it very quickly gets more and more immersive, but it's also just really fun. Those are kind of like the Saddest and the Raddest, the best and worst things that players do at my table. And I hope that helps the new guy. I hope it explains kind of what we're looking for. I suspect that none of these were the things you were thinking of when you asked me how to be a better role player. And I look forward to you having the unique and glorious opportunity to Play with actual role players. It's just the best. There's one bonus tip. Kept this one special for you. Show up on Sunday.